All right, we are live. Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. It is episode 8 of Imposter Syndrome, and it's been a while since the last episode, but I wanted to reboot this segment because I love the spirit of this show. I loved the episodes that we've been able to have so far, and essentially what this show is authors sitting down and having a deep, honest chat about different topics in writing and publishing, etc. And this evening, it was a very easy decision to bring back my good friend, Andrew D. Meredith. I think I'm pointing the right direction. Who's been on this show 4 times now, I think. And tonight we're going to be talking about pivoting in writing and publishing and life and things. And I'm sure we will go off on some tangents. Everyone in the comments, feel free to throw in some questions, comments, concerns as we go along. And really quickly, I will have us both introduce for those of you that are watching the replay or new to the channel. Hey, Zin, we have K.E. Andrews in the chat. Everyone go check out her books. We have Quinn. Hello, everybody. So, Andrew, who are you and what do you write?
Sorry. I am Andrew D. Meredith, and I write epic fantasy, among other things. I am the author of the Needle and Leaf series, Thrice and Fourscored. It's a Slavic-inspired fantasy, man and boy on the road. Little boy has way too much magic, and his adopted father says, let's just go straight into the bear's cave and ask them to stop really nicely under whatever circumstances possible. And then I'm also the author of the epic fantasy series, The Collation Saga. The first 3 books are out, which are Deathless Beast, Bone Shroud, and Gloves of Eons, which is right there. And art done by Sarah Ferrari. And
a lot of Sarah art in this stream.
Yes, absolutely. And that is an epic multi-point of view fantasy extravaganza. Mercenaries, paladins, paladames, gods, a man with a cloak that makes them invisible to the gods and wants to kill them. You know, the usual stuff. And the 4th book will be coming out for that some point later this year. It's in the editing process, which is I take a much longer process than some indie authors, but it's still quick. It's not 3 years out. It's this year.
Mm-hmm. It's not trad pub timelines.
No. What do you write?
I am Tori, and besides running a booktube channel, I also have a dark supernatural YA fantasy called Phased, which is about 2 werewolf sisters who are trying to prove that they can survive in human culture, or else be sent back to the labs, basically. And then The Bloodstones is my dark, epic, Eastern-inspired fantasy debut. It's the first in a trilogy called Legends of the Bruhai. I am also currently working on the next book in that series, which will be out at some point. So that is me, and that is Andrew. So hello, everyone. Hey, Tim.
Hello.
Nice to see you. Zin, I feel this on a spiritual level, my friend, honestly. Hey, Britton. So we're going to get right into it because we have a lot of things that we wanted to chat through. And again, for anybody in the chat, feel free to drop comments and questions as we go along. But we wanted to kind of start with what a pivot is, like how we're defining that and what we're going to be talking about through the stream. And the idea that pivots are not just a change in direction. They can mean a lot of different things and a lot of different, depending on your perspective or what situation you're in. So Andrew, why did we literally decided this, yesterday that we were going to talk about pivots. Yeah. So why pivots?
I think we've both had major pivots in our life, not just in our writing, but in life goals, in career changes, and that all feeds into each other and can also allow you to be better at pivoting later. I would say we're not talking about corporate pivots, which is my least favorite corporate term.
We're
reclaiming it for us writers. Pivot, like you said, is not a change of direction, because that happens. It's not just changing direction. It's when you have a violent life change, right? A violent shift in the thing that you have to do, whether that's because you got fired, and you got to get a new career. Or in my case, in college, I went from miniature design for miniatures games to being a comic book artist to being a game designer and thinking I was going to be a writer, and then later came back to writing, which is what I always wanted to do as I was a kid. So that was a pivot that took me through life experience and back to where I needed to be to do what I'm doing now.
Yeah. One of the things that struck me right away when we were talking about it earlier today was just that I think oftentimes when we hit crossroads like that, and this is especially poignant for our writing careers, I think, in terms of this episode, but certainly applicable to life in general, is how you respond to those moments where you suddenly you realize we need a shift, or something isn't working, or something comes out of nowhere and you have to suddenly make a shift to a different direction, or make some adjustments that you weren't expecting. And to me, I've learned over the years, over a lot of trial and error, to start looking at pivots as a opportunity for growth, to reevaluate, to reprioritize, to kind of reassess where I'm at and see if there's maybe something better that I'm missing, or how can I turn this situation into something better. And that's definitely applicable, as we'll get into a little bit later, when you're writing a book, when you're approaching your writing career, when you're marketing, like any of the above. So I think this topic specifically is pretty applicable to any aspect of what we do.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and I will say, even though I said I hate it as a corporate term, it's huge in the entrepreneurial sphere, and especially we indie authors, we're entrepreneurial. Right. So pivoting can be micro because we're still small beans. We have to change. We have to pursue the thing that's working. You know, if you're in a much slower industry, the pivot comes from, oh, that's the one making money, so write the rest of the trilogy on that one, please. Right. Whereas we do the exact same thing, only we can do it we can pivot on our heels, right? And say, oh, wait, that's making money. I really do kind of need to pay the bills next month. Guess what I'm writing now? And you stop, and then you switch back later. So pivoting is not always a completely violent shift into a totally new life. It can be just as much as like a dance step, just stepping one way and then coming back later. So
Yep. And I mean, I know a lot of us in the indie sphere write on multiple projects at a time. And sometimes it can be as simple as, you know what, I'm stuck on this project. I need to pivot slightly to another one, which we'll talk about again later. But like giving yourself space to move, because I think sometimes it can be really easy to get so hyper fixated on this kind of tunnel vision, one direction. And then when that maybe needs a shift, we kind of panic. Like, oh no, I don't know how to cope with that much of a shift, because that doesn't
and
look
practicing it early enables us to do it better later.
Right.
If we get stuck on a one track for a long time, you know, like say we read the same kind of books all the way through junior high and high school and have no idea how to read a different genre, it's a pivot. It's a huge pivot to change to suddenly reading sci-fi when all you've ever consumed is fantasy. Or having to, or if all you've ever read is, you know, early fantasy and you hit college and got to learn to read literary fiction. That's a huge shift if you're not used to it, or inside genre too. Right. And so that's why what I mean is that all of them feed each other. If you are a fantasy reader and you learn to read literary, yes, it's going to help you read Malazan more so than somebody who has no idea what they're getting into.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It is funny because when people ask me or express that they're a little apprehensive about reading Malazan, I always kind of try to feel out, like, what do you read already? Because that gives me a better idea of like how much of a mindset shift it might be for somebody reading it.
Yeah. Well, I mean that's why having human interaction on what you should read is more important than what the algorithm tells you to do. Because if all you're reading is one genre, and it's never going to tell you to read Malazan,
the algorithm's going to want you to read more of the same.
More of the same,
it's
right?
Predictable.
Right. And when we can be that way as well, until we realize that there's a wider world outside of ourselves and what we're reading. And a good book reader should be able to take 3 books that you love and say, here's something totally different I think you'll love.
Yes.
Not
Whether
more
that's
of
in
same.
a different genre or a different subgenre or whatever it
Right.
is.
Yeah. Someone says, oh,
Absolutely.
I like fantasy. I read The Hobbit back when I was 12. Okay, well, what else do you read? Well, I don't read anything outside of, I only read other things outside of fantasy. That's what I mean. What else do you read?
Yeah.
So that we can
Yeah.
reinsert on that. Yeah.
Yeah. If somebody comes to me and says they love reading Dickens or Dumas, I might be like, you know what? Here's Malazan. You
Right.
know?
Right. Or Jonathan Strange.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Hi, AP. Human interaction, surely not. The tech bros keep telling me that AI is the way to go. Yeah, just let your AI tell you what to read next. That's a whole other episode, which we may do at some point. We might get in there. Britain always. This is one of my top recommendations for anybody that can handle any kind of dark fantasy. Love Gentlemen Bastards.
Yeah.
So too, like opportunities of growth, and also looking at it as pivots being, I think we kind of assume it sometimes that it's connected with like a failure of some kind, and that's some kind of an ending, that something's falling apart or ending. And instead of looking at it that way, shifting to, this is a beginning. This is okay. Stop. We're starting on a new path. That's okay, because it might lead to something way better.
Right.
Which often it does, I think, for both of us from a lot of the experiences that we've had.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of authors who have had to do, who are not, I wouldn't say had to. The person I was thinking of Lois McMaster-Bujold, who was a science fiction author, almost exclusively. I think she had a few that she did outside of there, but she was exclusively writing, Verkozigan saga from late 80s all the way through the 90s. And then she pivoted entirely to fantasy with her World of the Five Gods, which is a very different series.
Yeah.
And having read some of both, it's still Lois. Oh, but it's 2 different Loises.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it was she needed a break and I want to do something different and here's my passion, or it was that the Vorkosigan was done and so she needed something new. And there's no way to know unless you have actually asked her. But knowing what causes her to pivot, it could be that she was working on Five Gods in her head for 10 years and finally got around to doing it. But that was a massive pivot. But it's still Lois. It's still Lois's writing, but in my opinion, the new stuff is better because it's all of that culmination of what she was writing
and learned. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and also, I think one of the beauties of indie is that we have more space to take risks, to try new things and experiment when we need to take those pivot moments. And I honestly think too that generally speaking, the community that we are in tends to be more forgiving of that. Instead
we're writing faster anyway, right?
Right.
So if we say it's going to be an extra year, it could be worse. It could be 3.
Could be 3, right, or longer.
Yeah.
And we talked a little bit about too, like projecting forward when you hit those moments and stopping and saying, okay, depending on what decision I make, what does this look like in a year? What does this look like in 5 years? What does this look like in the next book? And try to, instead of panicking about the moment, look forward into the future and try to figure out, if I make this decision and switch here, what does that look like in the future? How does this change? And how does this fit into the wider goals that I have? Katie, you write that book with as much time as you need to. Because I also think that sometimes the indie sphere, one of our downsides is that we write really fast, and sometimes that can be a detriment. So let's talk about
AP's got a deep cut there.
Got a good one there. Thank you. There is also a fascinating aspect of genre in that it can be a mode of writing, not just identified through narrative content and tropes.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Katie, this is absolutely something that we have in our notes here too that we want to talk about. I found it can be helpful to start a new story while working on a current run, because I'll either get something out that didn't exist before or restart my motivation to continue the old project. Absolutely.
Yes.
So speaking of that, let's delve into some of our personal pivots and styles of writing, because both of us have kind of done a mini writing process pivot. Should we call it that? Sort of with our last projects. Do you want to tell everybody current projects? Yep.
So I have been a violent outliner since I started back up in 2017. I have tried to do discovery writing, and it tends to stress me out. It feels like strapping into a roller coaster, but with no straps when I do it, because I'm just like
hanging onto
screaming
the
at the screen, and I can't, and I got to keep writing. I don't know what's going to happen. What's going to happen next? And I just keep going and going and going and going. And that's how I finished my first big manuscript. Was like the last quarter was discovery, but I was angry and stressed, and so I said, I'm not doing this ever again. As a result, I tend to end each book with a bit of discovery writing, and so I end up stressed and angry. But that aside, I have from there adapted how I outline, where I outline the whole book, and then at 50%, 75%, 90%, I reassess before I finish the end of my journey. So the project I'm working on now was completely discovery written, and I had the idea on a whim in January, I think. And then I started it January 22nd, and I finished it February 18th. I wrote 50,000 words, short, cozy fantasy, completely discovery written. It didn't stress me out because it's cozy. So I was just kind of meandering my way through on this slow journey and just happening to write 2,000 to 4,000 words a day. And no big deal. So and as a result, I know you're trying to get this out of me. It's a what if you took All Creatures Great and Small and crossed it with Pixar's Onward. And it's a story of a veterinary clinic in the middle of a fantasy city, and the veterinarian is best friends with like lich overlords who he goes and inspects their dungeons for him for no big deal, and lots of politicking. And it's been a blast to write, and now I'm in the editing process for that one too. Completely discovery written.
Which Quinn had a comment on Twitter earlier that I needed to razz you for discovery writing your latest book. And we've known each other long enough now that we know that we're pretty stubborn and set in our ways as writers. And so for you, the pivot to I was flabbergasted. I was like, oh, he's discovery writing this. This is going to crash and burn real quick. And then a month later, you have this, final product book, and you had a great time writing it. And I similarly, so I'm kind of well known at this point for being an anti-outliner, which again, and this is something that we could have a whole topic of conversation about, the spectrum of, planner to pantser and all of the different things that can be in between there. I mean, same, Quinn. I don't know what's going on. I just work here.
Never let them know your next move. Never let them know your next move.
But I tend to be the opposite, where if I were to start a book with an entire outline that says, here's everything that happens. And I know some people that plan out all the beats and all of the scenes and all of the everything. That would stress me out, because I would feel like I'm in a coffin and I can't get out. That stresses me out. You just need
a bigger coffin.
I don't think that would work.
Bury yourself in a boat and then light it on fire with an arrow.
No.
Burial.
Then I get my wide open spaces at least.
That's right.
Yeah, but I've discovered through slight pivots, and I've learned so much about myself as a writer in the last 4 years, honestly, even in the last year and a half writing Bloodstones, because writing an epic fantasy, there's just so much there that you have to utilize note-taking or in some way, at least a little bit, because otherwise it's just too much to all keep in your head. And so I started learning that I could get a little ways into the book, and if I got stuck, I would outline. And by outline, I mean, I would reach out to Andrew or one of my other friends, writing friends, and be like, okay, so what if the next scene was this, this, and this? Does that make sense? And that's like my version of outlining, is kind of talking it out. And I might jot down a few notes. So there is a tiny bit of that. But I did a pivot in the middle of starting work on, or I was about in the middle of Bloodstones, and I wrote the short story for our Advent of Winter anthology that came out in December. And I was like, I need a break. I need a brain break. And my creativity is dying because I'm in one project and I feel like it's sapping all of my brain energy. And so I pivoted from a third person past multi POV epic to a first person present story about a necromancer bounty hunter, just for kicks and giggles. And I loved it. And all of a sudden that creativity started coming back. And now I'm expanding that into a larger series that I am, gasp, I even showed it to Andrew earlier today, sort of outlining a little bit.
There was a spreadsheet.
There was okay, my version
there was
of
a spreadsheet.
My version of
it was only 12 cells. It's still a spreadsheet.
Comparatively, Andrew has like moon phases for the different areas of.
I did that so long ago. I don't have to worry about it.
So long ago. It's nothing. It's nothing. But for me, that's a lot of outlining for me. A 12 cell spreadsheet is like, that's a big deal for me. And instead of resisting that as that's not my writing process, which I was doing for a long time, I'm learning to pivot slightly and say, for this particular series, I need a little bit of this just to kind of get an idea in my head of sort of where I want these different books to land. And I can go as far into that or not as I choose. And again, that's the thing. It's never locked in stone. Like if you want to go back to your spreadsheets and outlines for your next book, which you probably will, I don't know, maybe not. Maybe you'll be a discovery writer for the rest of your life now. I doubt it. But same for me. Like I know that I will never outline to the same extent that my outliner friends do, but I'm learning how to pivot slightly when the individual projects call for that, especially, even if it's in the middle of Bloodstones. I'm like, I just need to outline the next chapter and that's it.
Yeah.
Utilize the bits and pieces of it that work for you.
And, it may be a character by character basis too.
Absolutely.
In the Calatian saga, Katiam is the hardest character for me to write. So I had to do her process completely differently. I could not even begin to try to discovery write her work. I have to be very structured because I'm deep diving in a character that I have trouble relating to.
Yeah.
Versus someone like Jinid or Hannon are so easy to write that I can give broad brushstrokes, and I know it's going to be a good drawing by the end. It's going to look great because they just come naturally. Right. So different, and you may, especially when you start writing more battle scenes, certain battles may require a heavy amount of structure, and that can be robotic and inhuman, but then the people in the battle are who live, right?
That's where the life comes out of it, for sure. AP, it's funny you brought this up because this was actually on our notes for this evening, talking about creative rest, writers at rest, and how important that is, and creative input versus output. So that is definitely something that I want to have us get to in this chat, because I think that is an incredibly underappreciated part of the creative process. And I think we should talk about it more. So we're definitely going to. R.A. Morley says, anti-outline, Chaos Goblins. Absolutely. Let's see. Katie says, I think my last book was pretty much a discovery book with very little detailed outlining. That's basically how I operate mostly.
Wait, you wrote a book about two people who take care of a garden as a gardener, discovery writing?
What? That was a little too perfect. Sometimes with outlining too, I've discovered that because I have a fairly short attention span, if I write a whole outline of a book, I feel like I've already written the story, and I don't want to have to do it again because I don't like repetition. So I can get bored very quickly. If I start outlining too much, I lose some of that treasure hunt feel that I love so much. When you start working through a scene and you suddenly realize where it's going and you get all excited and you're like, oh my gosh, I just discovered how these pieces fit together. I love that. I love that kind of adrenaline rush. And if I outline too much, I don't really get that as much. And that's really depressing to me. So hello. Quinn wants to know, do you find continuity editing and world building to be difficult with discovery writing? Well, Andrew, as a newly minted discovery writer,
I'm still
did you
taking notes as I
find
go. I'm still taking notes as I go. So there's still some developmental work that goes in. It was not a 100% pantsing endeavor. I had a few times I had to stop and spend a few hours just figuring out, what's going to happen next,
percolating?
How many levels are in this dungeon, things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For me, sometimes, and this is another thing that we're going to touch on later too, this is where I feel like the creative village is really helpful. I tend to hyperfixate on a grandiose amount of details in my head. They just never make it onto a piece of paper or a spreadsheet. So a lot, especially when it comes to characters, like I remember details about my characters pretty intimately, just because I'm a character writer first. And so with that part, I don't have as much of a problem. But when it comes to like world building details, I do go back and reread sections I've already written, especially if I'm going back to a POV that I haven't been in for a couple of chapters. I'll go back and reread sometimes the last 1 or 2 chapters of that character and kind of skim through it. Just to kind of bring myself back into, okay, so this was important and that was important, and I need to make sure I, mention this detail again or whatever it is. Yeah. But it can be for sure. So finding ways to support whatever writing process you have is really important. Know your own writing process.
And we cannot be an island.
No.
The sooner you're a member of the archipelago of writers, the better.
Yes.
100%. Don't go on your own.
Well, and especially because, like me, I am an incredibly talk it out person. And so I needed to build an inner circle of people that I can trust, where if I get stuck on something, I can reach out and say, hey, Andrew, I'm struggling with the scene with these 2 characters. Does this make sense? Like, I just need to put it out in the air in conversation with somebody else. And Andrew usually is just like, sounds great, keep going. And that's all I need. Like, just the knowing that somebody else had eyes on it and was like, yep, that makes sense. So that I'm not always
to have somebody say, that's not stupid. Stop.
No,
don't stop.
Just do it. Go for it.
And I will pitch now that, part of that is you need to find somebody who's at the same career point as you right now. So you're a new writer and just starting to write. You need to find other writers who are just starting to write, because there's a difference between finding a mentor and finding colleagues.
Yes.
And you need colleagues who are at the exact same level that you are. The example would be the fact that sometimes when you say, how's this sound? I say, that's great, keep going. Might be just because I'm too busy right now. And so I'm just telling you, keep going. Don't stop. You're great, Tori. I'll check this out later. But just being encouraging like that. But you wouldn't want that from me all the time.
No.
And the same a new writer doesn't need to have an older writer who, if you're pinging constantly, isn't just saying, yeah, that sounds great, just keep going.
Yeah.
Because they probably are a little busy. They're doing their own thing and they're somewhere else on, and that's so far, it's kind of insulting to say, but it's so far back from where they're at now that they have to stop, refocus, and have a one-on-one with you. That's what a mentor's for, is for the one-on-ones who can tell you, back when I was doing that.
Sagely advice.
Too, right? Yeah. So if you're a new writer, find people now so that you can decide if they are people you trust and they can trust you, and that you have a good friendship with them. Because we can have, yes, there are people who are untrustworthy, but do not assume everybody's untrustworthy, or you'll never find anybody, because you might be projecting on them something that's not true. So
yeah. Well, and I mean, when you start, I mean, I met you guys almost 2 years ago. And, we've had a chance to really get to know each other as writers. And that's where, when you start building that time and put that effort in, when we run brainstorm ideas past each other, we know each other well enough that we can say, yep, that sounds like you. This one, I don't know about that. What if we, maybe talk that through a little bit more? Because, building those relationships where you trust the other person to suggest a pivot when you need
and
one.
not be insulted.
Right. Which takes some time for a lot of us as writers to get past that initial hurdle of, I can't hear any criticism about my very vulnerable art. That's really hard.
It can be an advantage of having strangers you become friends with, though.
Yeah, for sure.
Is I need my wife to be encouraging at times. And other times I'll say, I need you to look me in the eye and tell me if this is good.
Yep.
And other times I just need her to say, that sounds great. You just keep going.
Right.
And
we all need that.
Right. But having a stranger, whether they've become a friend or not, having somebody who's outside of your marriage, outside of all your normal friends that you've known since high school, that can say, that kind of sucked. You got to fix that chapter. I'm not saying it's all bad. I'm saying that chapter sucked and you need to fix it. I'm like, oh, okay. You're a professional as well. Great. As opposed to me going, well, here's what I think about your book.
Your work sucks.
Yeah.
Well, and that's where too, when you have those relationships with the people in your inner circle, the writers that you trust, that are also pursuing similar goals to you, that have a similar outlook on writing and the career of publishing, it allows you to now have people in your court that are going to challenge you because they want to see you succeed, not because they don't care or they don't like you. It's because they genuinely have a suggestion that they want to see you be the best version of yourself.
I would also point out the other reason you need those colleagues who are at the same level of you and are doing the same thing as you. It allows you to get to the next step together. I've had examples where I've tried to join a writing group and there's a couple of poets and a couple of literary writers, and they have no desire to read my fantasy books, but they want me to listen and compliment them. And I'm like, that
doesn't help me.
And so I move on. No, but if I find other fantasy authors who are learning how to lay out things in Ingram, that you can go, I'm panicking. It's taking me 5 days. I'm like, I did it in an hour. What's your problem? What? Okay, then you can say, well, let me walk you through it and we'll fix it together. Because
you didn't need to call me out like that, Andrew.
Right.
Just kidding.
But we need to learn from people who are going through the same struggles or who happen to be better connected than we are and can go, you know what? I know somebody who can fix that. Let's go talk to them. And you walk them over there and you talk to them. But
that's
you're really going to get that from colleagues. Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's the village and why it's so important to, I'm a big advocate for new writers. When I have new writers come in and ask me, what do I do? Everything's so overwhelming. There's so many people. There's so many things to learn. I'm trying to write a book and it's really scary. And it's just like, you're kind of stuck in that whirlwind of all of the things all at once. Build your network, period. Like, you work on your book, whatever you want to do on the side, but where you focus when you first come in, meet people of all different stages of writing, learn from the people that have, I'm learning so much from the people that have been self-publishing for, in this particular arena for many more years than I have, and have been doing really well, have way more books out than I do. And I'm doing my best to now share those shortcuts with the people that are coming up behind me and starting on their first book journey. And that's where the village comes in, is we can all, and you've all heard the indie mantra of a rising tide raises all ships, right? Like, that's very true. And we all succeed together when everybody's kind of intermingled and helping each other. And then it doesn't land
going to college. It's like going to college.
And it also doesn't land squarely on like the one person, also, like, you can kind of spread out asking for advice and asking for feedback, and it's not landing on the one person.
Yeah. And I'll, it's like going to college. When you're a freshman, you tell people, you have to tell freshmen that in the first year, you need to learn to socialize and you need to learn to do your homework. If you let either one of them go by the wayside, that will fail for the rest of your life. You don't learn to make friends in your freshman year, you're going to have trouble making friends for the next 30 years.
Yep.
So take the time now to do that. Yeah, but I need to get published tomorrow. Got it. Take the time to become friends while you're learning your things so that you can promote that. And the friends you make right out of the gate are not going to be your friends for life, just like in college.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have people you thought, oh, I want to be friends with them. They're the popular people. I had people who I thought I'd be friends with when I first got into the indie community. I'm not friends with. We're acquaintances and we know each other and we'll chat. But they're the cool popular kids who I thought, oh, that's who I want to see. And then you learn who your real friends, who the people you become really good friends with, because you're in the same you're in the same hall, you're in the same degree. And so, but if you don't do that early, while you can, because you got time. Oh, I don't have time. I need to get published tomorrow. You have time.
Yep.
This is the time. This is the time to know yourself, to learn yourself, to figure out how you tick, so that you know how to fix the problem when the problems come. So you can pivot, to bring us all back. So you can pivot because you know how you work and you know how you pivot. You will just be better if you know yourself.
Well, and not to take too much of a soapbox swerve to networking, because that's kind of my sweet spot in terms of what I do. But I see so many people come flying into the indie space with their book and they're going to publish and they're so excited, which is awesome. And they don't network and they throw their book out there and then they get really disheartened when it's crickets. And it's like, part of building that network is finding the people that know you as a person, not just your books, but you as a person, so that when you drop a new book, you've got a group of people that are already like, yeah, let's repost. I'm excited. That's so cool. I'm going to share this with my people. And now your reach is just so much farther. So in my opinion, network before you publish. Period. Like, it's the most important thing that you can do, and do it to build those genuine relationships. Don't do it for the transactional, well, I want to sell books. Do it because you genuinely want to build those relationships and meet people that you can have these mutually beneficial and supportive relationships with. Yeah.
Now, that being said, if you didn't do that and you're already published, that doesn't mean you failed. You can pivot and start backtracking and networking with the books you already have out.
Yeah.
I did not have a huge network when Thrice came out, and it was a slow burn book. And then over the course of a year and a half, I started making friends and kind of spent my time reasserting myself and being public. And I suffer from that a little bit, but also I'm very fortunate with the friends that I have who I would not have if I had been networking a year and a half earlier, because now I had the friends I have. And so it's just like, I didn't start really writing until 2017 at age 35. So 35, I of course I would have loved to have written earlier. And I did do some writing earlier, but it wasn't my right time. There are other authors, their right time is early. There are other authors, their right time is much later. And so just network now. And for those of you who are just getting started, network now.
Network now, no matter where you're at.
And not just and I'll reemphasize, this is not business networking to sell books. This is, you need friends. We all need friends. I don't care if you're introvert or extrovert. You need friends, because you need like Ari Morley said, you got to have somebody to fall back on if you fail. Yep. And if you don't, you're going to fail on your own. Be part of the archipelago of authors. We are islands, but we are not all alone.
Right. Well, and you know, that network will also introduce you to people that you would never met otherwise. I mean, I've been able to meet so many people that if it were just me, it was a mutual introduction, right? Where somebody said, hey, I want you to meet Tori. And it just constantly expands the network, because it's a exponential growth factor when you really put yourself out there. And you can do that as an introvert too, I promise. It might look different, but it's not, you can still do it. I promise. Yeah. I want to go back up, because I know there were some, we've just gone all over my page of notes here. So I'm just going to put that over there.
Derek has a good question too that we should address.
Yes. I noticed that one. There's a couple above that I'll go back to, but
so we're getting you guys.
We will get there. I promise. How do you guys balance putting in the work and not getting burned out when it feels like those efforts aren't really resulting in anything, whether it's networking, sales, quality interactions?
By pivoting. No. I mean, I pivoted with Thrice. I didn't feel like
Yeah.
it was doing well. I had an even bigger pivot with Collation because I released Deathless Beast as 3 separate books
Yep.
because I was basing my ideas on advertising from before COVID, which is a totally different world at that point.
Yep.
And not just socially. And so I pivoted because I felt I was early enough. I could go ahead and do it. I didn't have many reviews. And some people were like, well, it's still going to take time to get reviews on the bigger one. I got it. I'm getting no reviews and I made a mistake. So I pivoted because it was early. So pivoting could be anything from re-releasing with a new cover to writing another book. And then later, when you can afford it, releasing with a new cover. Because, I mean, that's the cool thing about indie is we're always changing covers and trying different things out. And so sometimes it is just moving forward to the next project and focusing on that so that those who become fans at the later projects go back and read the older projects. I mean, that's the old school way to do it, right? Because everybody just kept writing books, and it's still the old way. It's still the way to do it. So, I mean, not getting burned out is I probably asking yourself, why are you writing? Are you writing to be famous? Are you writing to make enough of a living? Which can be, following 20 books to 50K. If I write 20 books, I'll make 50K. Okay. The only way to find out if it's true is if you write 20 books. But you don't have to shotgun everything. Stick to the thing that you want to do and why you're doing it so that you are, you're focused on how you're doing it. And like Joe said, whiskey.
Yeah. Well, also, and this is partially where the village comes in, but I think part of it is also being willing to take a moment, step back, to look as objectively as one can at where you're at and what you have, and be very objective about what can I improve. Because we all can, right? There's already things after Bloodstones that I'm like, all right, for my next book, there are different, I'm going to do some things different because I know that that it's a growth opportunity that I can improve in certain areas. And being willing to look at, it's really hard to look in the mirror and be like, okay, what aspects am I weaker in? How do I shore those up? Who can I talk to that might be able to give me some advice? And go to those trusted people in your inner circle that you will have built by that point and say, what can I improve on? And the thing is, you have to have people in that circle that will give you an honest answer because they want you to succeed. Not because they're trying to be critical, not because they're malicious, but because they genuinely want to see you be the best.
Because it's gonna push our tide up too, right?
Yeah.
It's gonna raise all of our water. I would also say the flip side of that too is decide what you're unwilling to change.
Yeah.
Or whether you're willing to sideline the problem to fix later. So like I do tend to write slightly more literary. I would not consider myself a literary author, but there are some reviewers like John Morrow would be an example who says I lean literary, which can be a slower career. And I said, I got that. I don't feel like writing commercial fiction, whatever that means. Right. And so I said, nope, this is my style. I'm going to keep doing it. So that's something I've chosen not to fix. And then I go off and write a cozy. So, but Tori can attest, I've been thinking about writing a cozy for like a year
while.
Now.
Yeah.
And I've played around with the idea and I knew it would be something a little more commercial, whatever that means. And so I went ahead and did it. Now, it may be that it does incredibly well. And it's what I need to write to make ends meet. But I'm still going to write the stuff I want to write, which is a little bit more literary. So ask yourself what you're willing to compromise and what is uncompromisable that still lets you retain you as the author. Because, because that's what you need to decide. Why are you doing it and who are you and why are you you?
Yeah. Joe has a great point too. You can even pivot by rewriting the book you released and re-releasing it. It's not ideal, but it's absolutely possible. And that's the thing. I think a lot of times we get stuck in this mindset that things are set in stone. It's not, especially in the indie community. The reason why the indie community is so fluid and gives us so many options for pivoting is because we're not locked in to nearly as much. Which can be a pro and a con depending on how you utilize it. But yeah, I mean, absolutely. I did a pivot when I had Phased out before I had Bloodstones, I released that. I didn't have a community at that point. I just kind of got into Twitter at the end of mid 2022. And I realized that I needed to market Phase differently than I really hadn't been much before that.
In fact, you asked, should I be telling people I've written this other book, even though I'm a YouTuber? And I'm like, heck yeah.
Yeah.
And everybody bought it.
Yeah. And I've been really thankful for the reception that Phased has gotten, because it's not the typical read for a lot of my audience, which is great. And I love that people have been reading it and loving it, and showing it a lot of support. But it was a pivot, because I definitely pivoted from, I wrote a book and I'm not sure if I have the courage to be a real writer, quote unquote, yet, to nope, this is what I feel led to do in my life, and I can't stop writing books, so I might as well just dig in and build a fortress and get going. But that was a big pivot, and it started by building a network. And I got on Twitter and I met a couple weirdos like Andrew and Thiago, and they introduced me to a lot of other people, and that was the end of that. So that was a tangent, but I completely understand the fear of pivoting to a completely new space. It's terrifying at first, which Andrew can attest to. I was like a quivering mess the first couple of months. I was like, can I even write books? Like, you'll go through
this gal has been writing since she's 15.
12. Technically. Anyways, but yeah, I mean, and also just accepting that it's completely normal to have quit days. Yep. Like, we have quit.
Then the next day you got to write.
Exactly. Like, have your quit day, drink your wine, eat your donuts, metaphorical or realistic, and let yourself be upset or sad or disheartened. That's okay. It's okay. And then, all right, move on. Like, don't let yourself stay there. That's the part that gets you.
No.
Okay. I'm going to go back up now because I want to make sure.
While you're go ahead.
So Trisha wants to know, in the end, would you say it's discovery writing no matter what? I would.
So Patricia, my wife, and I just taught a class to a bunch of kids early this week, and we were discussing kind of overview of writing, and we talked about outlining versus planning versus planting, and we said the thing is, it's all discovery writing, and I'll die on that hill. Writing an outline is a discovery writing. It's just a very broad brushstroke of discovery writing, and discovery writing is discovery writing. So it's all discovery writing. If the way that you discovery write is by doing it in bullet points, great. I don't want to see bullet points in the final text. And if you don't do bullet points and you do a very detailed discovery write, I hope you went back and read it a couple times before you published it, because I don't want to read it if it hasn't been read through a couple times. Because there's going to be drafts, and so how you draft your first. I know that Britton was saying earlier he doesn't want to outline because it feels like a waste of time, and there are things that are waste of time. To every author has something they think is a waste of time. I honestly hate writing scenes that don't appear in the book. Having me sitting down for coffee with a character. That to me is a waste of time, so I don't do it. Doesn't mean it's wrong, and there are authors that live and breathe and die by that. I don't, but I outline extensively, so I'm wasting my time in my own way, right? And we're all going to waste our time in our own way, hopefully not just doom scrolling, but so just do your own thing. But in the end, it is all discovery writing. That's why we're telling a story. We're just going to formalize what the final story is going to be over the course of
and I would say like something that other writers might think is a waste of time on their end. For me, that is like a vital part of my process is I make music playlists. I have Pinterest mood boards of visual, inspirational pieces. And a lot of writers don't do that and don't need that. And that's fine. For me, if I didn't have that, I wouldn't have a book, so it's whatever pieces, again, to your individual process are necessary. It's going to be
we all have our mantras that we need, where we need to, some have to have this scented candle lit next to them while they're playing, because it's what puts them in their flow.
Hey, if that was
great.
What works, if that's what works for you,
do it.
Do it. Yep. Trisha says, sometimes I discovery write with a new idea, then go outline once I have an idea of where I'm going with it, and then go back to discovery writing. Same. Yeah. Yep. We're going to talk about this, Tim, because creative rest is something, again, that I don't think we talk about enough. Let's see. Katie says, my outlines are several pages of the basic plot points and maybe some characters. Then the discovery writing comes into play when I start playing with different characters and pieces of the story. Nice. Mine is basically completely opposite of that. Characters first. And then I'm like, all right, what are they doing? All right, Morley, I have the same exact feeling with outlines in my brain being like, but we already wrote the book. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the same reason I tell like new writers, don't tell us your story. Don't explain it in depth until you've at least gotten that first draft done. Because if you mentally already wrote the book, your brain won't let you finish it very often. So we tell like little kids that are writing, great, please stop telling me your story. Please just go write it. And then because you're literally going to fulfill your brain's need to tell the story right now, and then you're never going to do it.
Yeah. I know I'm late and that he's already left, but thank you, AP, for joining us when you come back to watch the rest of this. Derek's first, I think that was Derek's first comment. I don't know. We just kind of show up and talk about stuff sometimes. Britton says, I often go back to check if I'm contradicting myself when I'm in the midst of writing. Yep, all the time.
I often just leave myself a note and go fix it later.
Same. Yep. I like Post-it notes, and I'm kind of a scatterbrain. So I have Post-it notes. I have notes on my phone. I have random Microsoft Word documents. I usually have scribbles in a notebook. I have scribbles on a random receipt that's laying on my nightstand. I don't organize very well, but usually once I've written it down, it helps stick in my head better.
Oh yeah. Or will help you remind you to go back to fix it. Like, I can't remember that one actor's name or one character's name in my book. And then 2 pages later, I'll write it, and I'll just write it without thinking. Like, oh yeah, that's it. And then go back and fix the 2 pages before that. So they're back up to snuff.
Find and replace. Yeah. Teresa says, I'm more of a pantser, but I still end up reverse outlining after I finish a first draft to catch issues. Interesting. I don't think I've ever heard of that before.
It's a great way to plot out and double check that you've got tension all the time.
Yeah.
I outline, then write, then re-outline again at the end, like you do, Teresa, to make sure that I don't have any large swaths of nothing happening. So then I have to either get rid of or insert new conflicts to make sure that they're
interesting.
So that there's actually good flow.
I'm like curious to try that with like bloodstones, because it's already done, because then I wouldn't stress about it.
Get some colored sticky notes, and then write down each of your chapter names and do different colors for different things, like battle, arguments, or tension, or nothing, like yellow for nothing. And then mark what each of them has, and then you'll look at it and say, oh wow, there's 3 chapters, it's all yellow, that's a problem. Because there was nothing that happened at all, no tension, and you have tension all the way through yours. But it's a good way to just kind of see from broad view. If you have like, oh look, muddy middle's muddy, who'd have known?
But I think that can be useful on the opposite end too. If you see that like your whole book is just tension all the way through, recognizing, oop, I might need to put a moment of rest in here to just let the characters and the reader breathe for a minute.
Yes.
Ma,
the Japanese art of ma.
Yes.
Which is the stillness.
Got to sift through the courts to find the die. I think that was in reference to the finding your friends. Let's see. It's in my best interest to see you all succeed so I can brag about my cool friends. And then inevitably, if I fall, you help steady me again. 100%. Well, and if you think about it, it's kind of like a game of constant leapfrog. Like somebody might get a little bit ahead of you, and then they can like say, hey, do you know this person? I know this person. And then you leap ahead of them, and then they can pull you up. And it's just a continual growth.
And knowing people who write things you don't write also lets you suggest to somebody who hates your book.
Yeah.
So I really didn't like your book. I prefer something that's a lot more violent, maybe Asian inspired. You're like, okay, let me show you Tori.
Yep. And likewise, if somebody's like, I really, this is a little too violent for me, and I prefer a little bit more of a literary approach to my to my stories, be like, well, funny you should mention that.
Yeah.
I know a guy.
And selling other authors' books helps you learn to sell your own.
Yep. And that is one thing that I will say as a booktuber. Like, and people who know me well will attest to the fact that I often forget to mention my own books in like live streams.
Remind you.
And I know I have like 4 people that remind me in the comments, because I'm so used to, and I don't think that's a bad thing though, because I actually really, I love being able to hype other people's books up, because again, I'm here for everybody's books, not just my own. So networking, honestly, just start by having basic interactions with people. It doesn't have to be deep. It doesn't have to be like your whole life story, but just go on Twitter or Discord or whatever platform you choose, a booktube comment section.
They may or may not respond, and that's okay. Just being there. I remember just commenting on a lot of lives back in 2022, during 2020, on all the lives. You start to get people start realizing, oh, hey, how's it going? I'm so glad you're here. Like you saw the same thing, Britton, when you arrived. Hey, Britton, how's it going? Because people know you, so you're not unknown. So and then it's just a matter of just being, and then
okay, we answered that one. Katie says the Self Pub and Indie Network has been so crucial, and I've loved getting to meet so many amazing people, both readers, bloggers, and writers. Yeah, and that's the cool part, is having groups of people that aren't just writers, because I see a lot of writers get into like the Facebook groups where it's a whole bunch of writers that are all trying to pitch each other, like their books to each other, and they kind of sell in a circle. Spread out, get to know people that aren't just writers, that are just readers or just artists or whatever. Just for anybody watching the replay or in the chat, if you haven't already checked out Katie's books, I'm going to put up some eye candy briefly that you should definitely check out.
Beautifully laid out.
Beautiful. Hills of Heather and Bone and The Assassin of Grins and Secrets. I've read both. Highly recommend. That was our sponsor for the for the episode. I'm kidding. Katie, if you want to sponsor an episode, let me know. Tim says, I'll also add it can be hard networking before publishing compared to after. Measure your first book's success by how many friends it makes you. Yeah, for sure. And that's where, like, it isn't something where it's a failure if you haven't gotten to a certain stage. Like, just start now, wherever you're at. Okay, I'm checking to make sure I didn't miss any other questions. Trisha says it was much easier to network after I had a book out. Well, you immediately have common ground too, which is part of what can help for sure.
It also helps that Tori, you and I are extroverts. We might. So the question is, are we the only extroverts in this entire stream right now?
Maybe. Is anybody? All right, guys. Who else isn't? Who's our extroverts in the stream? In fairness, I'm like a 60% extrovert. So like, I understand introverts. I'm also married to an extreme introvert. So I get it. Yeah. And I know that can be harder, but it's not impossible. I used to be 90,
and after COVID, and I went to more like a 60-40 probably.
Oh, of course. That was a silly question, Andrew. Yeah. Of course. Joe. Yep. Tim is an ambivert. Yep, exactly. So I know Katie. Katie and I have been friends for quite a while, and I'm immediately like, guys, go read her books, because I genuinely want you to. Let's see. Derek is definitely not an extrovert. That's okay. Katie says true introverts won't answer that they're introverts. They just won't say anything. Suddenly the chat gets very quiet.
Call back.
I am an extroverted introvert. Social introverts are awesome. I think it's because you guys are smart enough to know when to not say things. But you know what, Zen? A lot of people know you in our community anyway. So also Barbarian Horde for life.
It's a huge advantage to the online community.
Huge advantage. And
I mean, even as an extrovert, it's hard to find people even locally who are other readers and writers, and not just because they're introverts and hiding in their basements, but it's just hard to find them. And yet we have this giant community of hundreds of of readers and writers because we are all connected as the single reader writer in an entire city, finding other readers and writers in an entire city until we find out that there are other ones in our city. We're still hanging out online, but it's a beautiful thing. Yeah.
Well, and I don't have a like community of close friends who live close to me. So most of my extrovert has to be released online because I don't have a lot of people that are nerds about fantasy specifically in my immediate circle. I was going to make a point about that, and my brain just went poof. Jefferson, I am also an ENFP. Nice to meet you. Hey.
Hey.
No wonder we're friends.
And it's amazing how many ENFPs and INFJs there are in our community.
Yes. Oh my gosh, lots.
Like two of the rarest, and here we are.
Yep.
Should we talk about career pivots?
Yes. Well, and that, thank you. That's exactly where my brain was going before, actually.
I saw your eyes wander to the notes.
Speaking of, you're not supposed to say that, Andrew.
There's no notes. There's no notes. I mean, forget what I said.
What notes? So I had a pretty massive career pivot multiple times, but like I mentioned earlier, my first self-pub book, I was 14. And I had a career between the ages of 14 and 19 where I traveled a lot. I did motivational speaking at young writers conferences and adult writers conferences and conventions and whatever. And I did a ton of that for like 5 years. I wrote 8-9 books in that time, sold over 10,000 copies. And I got really burned out, first of all, because I was a kid who had a career, and that was a lot. That was a lot. And I was in the spotlight a lot with that. And that was tough. And then I went to college, and I was just one of the students all of a sudden. And that was a big life pivot for me, right? And I was burned out enough that I now was trying to do academic writing, and that took away a lot of my creative space. And then I got married and had kids. So I had a massive life pivot there. And now I'm pivoting, deciding, yep, I want to be back in this community. I want to write books. I want to pursue an adult writing career now. The pivot of relearning all of this stuff, that was a very daunting pivot for me, especially because and I talked about the confidence factor when I was on Beard of Darkness with Matt last night. There was that fear of, can I even play in an adult sphere as a writer? Because yes, I was a child writer. I had all of these books. I had a lot of success, but there's always that doubt. Well, but now I'm an adult and I don't have the commodity factor, and I don't have, a lot of the momentum that I had at that point. So that was a huge pivot for me. And I would not have survived it. I wouldn't be here without the friends that I made in that early few months when I first jumped into the community, 100%. Yeah. And I'm so glad that I stayed.
Us too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, mine was, I wrote a book after I got married and was writing on the bus. So I had like 4 hours of writing time a day and wrote a whole book, and then got a job as a game designer. And then a year later got fired as a scapegoat for a budgetary thing. Doesn't matter. But I kind of stopped writing, and I was still designing, but I didn't want to write anymore, even though, because my job was both game design and writing fiction for the games. And I just didn't want to write. And I knew the old book I'd written, I knew secretly it wasn't any good. Right. And never wanted to face that, because it was the book I'd been working on since I was 13, and, as we all have. And so my pivot was slow because I discovered the Writing Excuses podcast and spent about a year listening through 12 seasons of podcasts to kind of like, you went to college. Well, that was my master's level program, was 12 seasons of podcasting and learning to rewrite books, learning to tear my old books down, learning to set aside my teenage writing years that I had never outgrown, and become a beautiful butterfly and become a better writer because of that. Obviously, I then had a lot more to learn over the course of writing and revising and and pursuing publication, and then eventually switching to indie. So there's a lot more that happens after that. But I had to have a full life stop and breakage from being let go from a job, so that I could pick myself back up and learn to write better.
Right.
So that was my my traumatic experience that took me from one version of me to a new version of writer Andrew.
Yeah. And, you know, again, part of it is learning to stand on your own 2 feet, because you need that. You have to have a balance of, you need a village to lean on, but you also need to be able to stand on your own 2 feet and build. Like, I couldn't rely on other people to build my confidence for me.
No.
They encouraged me to build that confidence, and I needed that support to do the work on my own so that I could now be a very confident member of the adult indie writing community.
Yeah.
But that takes work.
Why do we fall down, Mr. Bruce?
So that we can learn
to learn our
exactly. Now I need an Alfred in my life, especially if it's Michael Caine. Let me go back up, because I think oh my goodness, you guys, can I just pause briefly to say the audiences that I have in these chats, I love you guys. You guys are so awesome, and I love all of the comments and posts and questions you guys have. You have great points. Let's see. Tim says, all hail, find and replace. Yep. Let's see. That was about reverse outlining. Hey, Lantern, welcome back. I went back too far, I think. Now I'm rereading old comments. INFJs. Yep. Here's some INFJs representing. INFJ. I would never have guessed that Trisha was INFJ. I'm kidding.
It makes me wonder if, as a writing community, if NF is the binding factor,
because that's sense. Feeling and
intuition.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of makes sense.
And then, then there's Joe. Never mind.
Joe is always the exception.
He's like the Mongols.
As he should be. R.A. Morley says, I've been talking to various libraries asking about having a book event, and they were astonished to learn there were local authors. Yes. Oh my goodness. It is funny because I went into my local library, which is tiny rural Minnesota. Okay. And I went in and I asked about bringing my books in to show the head librarian. And I got the self-pub treatment. And what I mean by that is oh, you wrote a book. We can look at it. You know, that trepidation. So
I like how you layered in your Midwest accent even heavier there.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's because I live in rural Minnesota. So that is what people sound like here.
Yep.
My Scandinavian Midwestern accent does come out on occasion on live streams, and that sometimes I get called out for it. ENFPA. I don't know the like extra versions of when you add letters. I don't understand that, but good to know. I didn't know there were extra ones. INFJ. Some encouragement from the chat for Andrew.
It's my mother-in-law.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Sue.
Derek says there's a couple older things I've done that I'd love to redo and repurpose at some point. Yeah. I don't think we should be afraid of that. That's a pivot that, you know, if it's necessary and you feel like that's the right thing to do, trust that instinct, because that's there for a reason.
I'm just proud you didn't throw it away. It breaks my heart when I hear of an author who's thrown away an old book. It's like, trunk it. Don't throw it away.
Trunk it. Maybe you can, even if you utilize a character or parts of it in a future story, like it's all,
just knowing it's there is a source of comfort.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, Morley, we're awesome. Finally, I'm at the cool kids table. You know, I always tell people I've waited my entire life to have friends as weird and nerdy as I am, and I'm living for it. It's awesome. ENTJ. Still the M, though, the intuitive.
It's true.
It's still there. Okay, hold on. Hold on, let me quick ban our troll in the comments here. Okay. I finally scrolled to the bottom. Sorry about that, guys. It does help that I bring in a physical copy of the book. I always forget that I'm going like to the library and I should bring the books in. So I will do that next time because that would definitely help. Let's see. I feel like the pivot I need is more of an unlearning of a lot of conventional wisdom in the age of the internet, and I'm not sure how to do that so as to prioritize my real love of literary fiction.
You know, I don't think it's such a bad thing. I think it's like keeping a bookshelf of your college books. You're never going to throw those away. You spent way too much money on them. Every time it comes up and it's like, okay, maybe you did, Tori. But I have so many old history books and stuff from college that I'll never throw away. They're in my garage in a box, but they're there, and I wish I had kept mine.
In fairness,
right?
Yeah.
So don't feel like you have to chuck away. The fact that you are saying you want to unlearn means you're not an old dog who can't learn new tricks.
Yep.
Because that's a mindset to say that you can't learn things, and the fact that you're saying that means you are willing to learn something, and it's not like you learning more is going to just compact what's already sitting there. What is already sitting there is going to help inform the way that you process the new things that you're learning. So honestly, just saying you want to prioritize literary fiction and move forward with that, and let all of those things inform what it is that you're going to do, whether that's reading more books because that's what you want to do is read, or whether as a writer you want to write. Let those things kind of sit there as behind your head and inform what you're going to write. So yeah.
Well, and I think sometimes, not that, because I also learned a lot of conventional wisdom that honestly hasn't served me well, but I also try to evaluate, okay, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You know, like there are nuggets of wisdom in there that I think are still applicable, even if it's, yep, that was me. Yeah. So anyways, so one of the things that we kind of were talking about with career pivots that sort of, it was kind of, I don't know that really fits in career pivots, but we'll go with it. Second book slumps. That was something that you brought up as a thing that we wanted to kind of bring up. Cause I know we've kind of talked about the broader scope of things. And now like when you're in a book or you're in a series specifically, second book slump is a thing we've talked a lot about. And I think I'm learning how to skirt a lot of that issue as I'm going through my second book right now. And you kind of found a way to skirt it all together.
Well, let's define our terms first. Is the second book slump, from a writer's point of view, is having trouble writing that second book. And it often manifests in the fact that the second book is the sophomore book, which can also be the weakest book.
And it's also just a filler between book 1 and book 3.
Right.
Yeah.
And the causality of that is the fact that you spent years and years and years writing book 1. And let's say you're traditional published, which is where the term is coming from originally, is that then you have to suddenly and quickly write a second book. And you have no idea how you wrote the first one. So you have to do all this relearning to write a book that's substandard because it doesn't have 6 years of time that you spent writing the first one. And so there's a lot of imposter syndrome that comes with that, of you trying to figure. See, I said it once. Trying to get that second book to be the same one. That's right. But that book 2 has to live up to that hype, is what you feel, right? So that being said, it's difficult. It's difficult to relearn to write. I accidentally tripped into not having a second book slump because I wrote a book, then split it in 2 and expanded them both into 2 books. So I had 2 books right away.
Yeah.
And then while I was shopping those books to try to find a traditional agent, I was bored, and so I wrote a second book. So I had a second series on top of that. So basically, when I'm feeling slumpy, I just switch to my other series. And so which I think Katie might have said something early on about that, is that having 2 projects going at once in 2 different series helps me crutch my way past those slumps. It still happens, and I'll still have times where I suddenly can't write for 3 months. That's just life. But having multiple projects, if you have the mind space for that, which can be very, very difficult as well, it helped me never feel like I'm slumping. I can always work on something new, because then you have the pressure of who you're trying to please. Like my wife's got now 3 different series going and a 4th one coming, because that's what was necessary. It's what was needed.
Yeah.
And honestly, her books are still coming out faster than anything with trad by series. So it's not like anybody's really being, held back from reading a book.
Right.
So that's how I stumbled my way out of not having a second book slump, was by pivoting into 2 parallel paths, as opposed to pivoting my path entirely opposite.
Right. Well, and I mean, for me, when I was younger, I wrote a series and then also a duology, a YA fantasy duology. And I think that was just honestly raw enthusiasm at that point, because I was just like flying my way through books and I couldn't type it out fast enough. And so now I'm having to pivot and be like, okay, I've done this before, but I was also like 15, which was a long time ago. And with Queen's Wolf, as I'm now pivoting to this new book, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, second book slump. The first book, I was really excited. I got it out there. It had a great reception. Everybody's loving it, and that's amazing. And then it hits you that you have to do it again. And that sudden realization of like that imposter syndrome, like you said, just kind of paralyzes you for a second. To what?
The second time we've said imposter syndrome.
Yes. Everybody take a shot. But I think, again, and this ties into the next topic that we have about creative rest, which I'm really excited to get to, because I was recognizing that part of the slump I was feeling, I had this big launch. I poured so much energy into the Bloodstones launch, and my brain space was just on like overdrive for 3 months. And then I thought that I could jump into January. I was going to have 10,000 words written of Queen's Wolf by the end of January. I was going to get right back into drafting, and I crashed hard in January because my brain was like, full stop, we need a rest, please.
Yep.
That is a pivot. We need to pivot away from the drafting, and we need to just creative input for a while, and not like, because our brains are not machines, which is, again, going back to all of the conversations about AI. This is a very organic process for us as people. It's not always going to be a linear, consistent process, right? And we need that rest and recharge to rebuild the creative fuel that we've poured into something else. And so, yeah, I paused and I let myself have my quit day, where I was like, I'm just going to quit. I got a book out. There's no way I can do it again. And now, after giving myself that space to pivot and rest, I'm now pivoting slowly back into drafting and loving it with 2 different projects. That was 2 different projects. And that's, again, recognizing that what works for me right now is having the option to kind of just go with whatever I'm in the mood for at the time.
Yeah.
So.
Well, a lot of that also happens with the crash from going from writing into the publication of the book.
Yep.
And that's where even my double project doesn't work.
Right.
Is that the moment you have to actually stop and do the layout and and I'm a guy who sits and will spend hours just spreadsheeting my schedule for the next 5 years. It doesn't mean I'm going to do that, but it helps me prep my mind for how I'm heading that way. And I'll schedule it out. Oh, this month will be when I'm publishing, and then I'll also be writing this other thing. Never, not once. If I'm in the middle of trying to lay out things, i.e. in the mornings when I wake up 5 a.m. to write, I can't write. I'm sitting there thinking about how I got to fix this problem and get this thing uploaded, or work on the audiobook more. And I can do the audiobook while I'm writing, but I can't publish the audiobook, and I'm just stressed by it. And so that creates another full stop. That's an aggravating stop. It's like, I just want to get back to writing, but you can't, because you got to adult for a little bit. And
because we wear all the hats.
Yes, exactly.
Yep.
And so that's really hard, because you're kind of forced to pivot into, now you're at publication mode, and then hopefully, if you're lucky, back into writing mode again. Yeah.
Yeah, but those are definitely like, view those as pivots, because you're pivoting from launching and marketing to theoretically creative rest to now we're back into drafting. And those are all transitionary periods that, like, just each one has its own place, and it's okay to, like, if you need a break and you feel like you need a break, give yourself one. Because usually our bodies are pretty like, hey, could use a break.
On the subject, I do want to answer Morley's at the very bottom comment. So everybody's different, and it depends on where in the country you are. The reason I say that is, like, I moved to Colorado where it's lots of sun, so I don't have seasonal depression anymore, which is nice. But the way I got around, the Christmas slump was leveraging NaNoWriMo to force myself back into a habit, whether I complete NaNoWriMo or not. Just making sure I can get 20 full days in November tends to give me the inertia I need to still write even only 500 words a day over December and then into January and then into February. So that's how I do it over the winter, is by using by using peer pressure to force me to write over November. My wife cannot write in December, and then because of that, it's very hard to get started back up. Because in December, there's lots of we all cook a lot of we do a lot of cookies and fudge and pies and whatever we're making. But I write at 5 a.m. and she doesn't, and so I can write in the morning and still help with cooking and making stuff for Christmas. That's great, good for me. But the point is that if you can figure out ways to hack your brain.
Yep.
Unless you don't care and you don't want to write in Christmas, then don't. But if you're like, boy, I wish I could write from November through winter, that's how I do it. Is I try to use ways to hack my brain into convincing myself to write every day, even if it's a few words at a day. It can be enough to get you going. Yeah.
I love this train of thought so much. I was just figuring it's the cold, running a small farm, adulting and white collar job, all my nonprofit work, and less daylight. Maybe I'm solar powered. Quite possible. And really quickly to answer Derek's question, yes, it was January 28th, or no, January 28th. And it is out. The reason I have not, I put it out there, but I'm going to be more marketing it heavier now, is because Amazon finally decided to let me on Audible, because I wasn't exclusive. So they were like, we're going to make you wait for a while. It is now out on all platforms, including audio, as of, I think, today or yesterday.
I just looked it up today and saw it was there. Yeah.
Right. And I've been checking pretty religiously, so it's got to have been in the last like 3 or 4 days. So yeah, it is officially out, and Andrew did a fantastic job. Everybody that I have talked to that has listened to the audiobook absolutely loves it. So thank you, Andrew. So yeah, it is available on pretty much every platform you would listen to audiobooks.
Apple, on. Spotify, weird ones you never heard of. They're all there.
Also, I went over to grab, because Patricia said, look at Joe, superhero in space, crossing all the genres, then hitting you in the heart for a moment before making you literally laugh out loud and killing it. So this is my second sponsor, for the unofficial sponsor for the evening, Wistful is Ending by JCM Byrne. For anybody on the replay or anybody in the chat who has not read this yet, I loved this book. I had no idea what to expect, and I absolutely loved it. I still recommend this to everyone all the time because it is a fantastic book. It is really, really good.
And that's a man who has pivoted. Yeah. He's writing Hybrid Helix.
Yep.
He's got the new, remind us the name, Joe. Stupid that I can't remember it, but it's late. He got the new magazine, the Grim Dwarf magazine, right? Which is a weekly chapter dwarf pugilist. And fantastic. I think he just Partial Function. Thank you, Joe, for reminding me of that name. And I think he just finished the first draft of book 5 of Hybrid Helix. Stop calling me a machine, because it's that man right there is an absolute machine.
Yeah. Some indie authors just
Yep.
have all of the momentum, and I'm just over here like, I'll get to it when I get to it.
Yep.
But that can also feel, talking about pivoting in kind of the second book slump. One of the things that I'm doing right now, working on Cold Silver, which is my serialized fantasy Yukon Gold Rush book, first book I'm working on right now, is writing epic fantasy takes a lot out of you. Like a lot. Yeah. And writing a second
emotionally
book,
draining. Yeah.
It is really, and just mentally, because there's so many things, there's just so much there. And so Cold Silver has been a great pivot opportunity for me, so that I'm not focused on my second book, like writing the second book of Bruhai as much, in terms of panicking over it. Because if I have a day where I'm like, oh, I don't know about this, I just go right on Cold Silver instead. And it gives me an immediate, I'm still writing, I'm still being creative, and it keeps me positive, so that when the next day I can go back to Queen's Wolf and say, yep, pivoting back to this, and I feel a lot better about it. And so multiple projects, if you can utilize it in a way that's helpful. If it makes you overwhelmed, don't do it. But if you can utilize it in a way that's helpful, it can be really, because then essentially I'll have 2 books theoretically finished by the end of the year instead of 1, which is always great.
Yeah.
Yes. Pretty much everybody who knows Andrew is aware of the of the excellent narrative skills.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
I still tell people that, and this is a side note, but I don't hear, and we've talked about this before, but I don't hear any auditory anything when I write. So a lot of people get kind of a surround sound kind of experience and imagine what their characters would sound like. And I don't ever. And so getting to hear Andrew's test lines for some of the characters in Bloodstones, it was like experiencing my characters for the first time in a completely new way, because I'd never heard Garen's voice, and all of a sudden it was just there. And I was like, wow, that's so cool. Like, I'm getting, as an author, it's so rewarding to feel surprised by your own book. Yeah. Still. R.A. Morley says, if you like my humor, you should check out my books. I definitely will. Let's see. Anitha says, I'm very, very late. Guys, please start over.
Oh, pivoting.
So pivoting. Hey,
she's
Daniel.
She's in corporate. She should know what pivoting is.
Yeah. It's so good. I'm really excited to get to the second book this year, because I loved Wistful Ascending. It's just trees and sky and a lake. It's calming, theoretically. Yeah, is this something that you deal with at all, Andrew, or you just are a machine and you write at 5 o'clock in the morning all the time, no matter what?
Oh yeah. When and it all the same would be true for recording. I've had to record this summer. I try not to record in summer. Fortunately, we're not living on a farm anymore, which had chickens and peacocks anytime there was light, so I could only record in darkness.
Oh, sure.
Now we do have trains and Air Force overhead all the time, so there's loud points, but I can hear them coming, stop, re-record the line. It's life.
Right.
But for writing, I used to have, I never realized I was having seasonal depression, and I could not write anything from November through February, and I wrote better in the summer. But now I'm living where there's 300 days of sun, and it can be snowy one day, and then that afternoon it's bright, sunny, and melting off, and I'm happy as a clam. So yes,
I mean, here
I'm
too
solar
this year,
powered too.
apparently.
What's that?
I said here too, apparently this year.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, we've had Minnesota, you guys, and I went outside in shorts and barefoot to my mailbox this morning, and I was like, what is this?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, seasonal depression can definitely be tough. I tend to try to, and maybe this says something kind of morbid about me, but I have always written through mental dips throughout my whole life. Like that was my outlet. So for me, whenever I hit a point of seasonal depression, which I also have during the winter months, I tend to kind of embrace that and try to pour it into the story somehow. I write harder scenes during that time, or whatever. Even if I just take a break and write some poetry, I pivot, write something different. Short fiction, do a scene. Even if I've written some scenes for book 3 in Legends of the Bruhai this winter, just as kind of little sketch kind of things. So there's ways that you can still have that creative output without forcing yourself into that kind of consistent pattern. Yeah. Joe says writing a serialized thing, maybe something easier structurally, can be so rewarding and recharging. I agree. I'm really enjoying it so far.
It was a great experiment too, to be able to force yourself into doing that new style. I mean, it's great.
Yep. Anitha wants to know, when is Needle and Leaf 3 coming out?
I'm writing it right now. I'm about a third of the way through the first draft. I was actually writing it December and January, and I just got back to it because I needed to do this other side project I've been working on. But it's being Needle and Leaf 3 is being worked on.
Awesome.
Yeah. And I'm so I was going to try to write Needle and Leaf 3, and there is going to be Needle and Leaf 4. I can tell you that right now. I was going to write them both together and then release them both together. I'm not going to do that now. I'm going to write number 3, probably go on and write number 4, but I'll let it mull before it comes out. So there are 2 more books, not just one. Yeah.
Yep. I briefly outlined, I think, 6 the Cold Silver series.
Nice. For the first third of the series.
No. Andrew is notorious for trying to get me to write much longer series than I anticipate writing. And yes, Andrew, phased is a duology still.
I know. I've come to accept that.
You've excellent, wonderful. So, okay, the other thing we've been talking about for a while that I wanted to make sure we got to in this stream was the importance of creative rest, and kind of going along with that, the input versus output. Really quickly, yes, Anitha, I am writing a necromancer bounty hunter in a fantasy inspired, your Yukon Gold Rush inspired fantasy world.
And I'm writing I wrote this last month a cozy All Creatures Great and Small meets on Pixar's Onward story that I'll be releasing later this year.
I can't wait to read it.
Me too.
I'm excited. Yeah, but you already know what happens. You really haven't told me much about it.
Nope.
So curious. I know a lot of people
read it.
Yes, which will be great. I don't either, Daniel. I wouldn't know anybody that is that crazy. I get nervous, even planning out, having one note for 6 different books. Today on Cold Silver, I was like, oh man, 6 books. I don't know about that. We'll see how it goes.
One at a time.
One at a time. That's right. Okay, so creative rest and input versus output, because this is something that I think the indie community particularly is awful at honoring and talking about, because we don't know what taking a break looks like most of the time.
No, I don't.
And yeah, I mean, the reason that we can talk about this is because both of us also suck at it. So it's, this last year, I've learned a lot about myself as a reader and writer, and creative rest is something that I am really trying to embrace more, because oftentimes when I hit a slump or a wall with my writing, I realize that my creative input is empty. I haven't just sat and read a book that I wanted to read or reread for fun because it inspires me. Or like this last week, I haven't done very much writing, but I've watched 5 of my favorite Western films as kind of an inspiration filler for my fantasy Western. So giving yourself that time to refill that creative tank is something we do not talk about enough, honestly. So Andrew, not that you do, but when you do take a 5-minute break, what do you use to kind of creatively pour back in?
So I'm an artist too. Not that I haven't shown a whole lot of what I do, but that's what I got a degree in, was art. And so I will do a lot of my input will be like taking some days to paint some miniatures or work on a map, even though it's for the same book. That is me doing something different. That's creative, but not writing, and doesn't feel so mentally straining. Outside of art, I now live in a place that's a great place for hiking at all times of the year. So I can go for a hike by myself. Often I'll take a journal so I can write poetry while I'm there, and then never write anything in it. That's the purpose. The purpose of journals is to own them, not to use them.
100%.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if they're good leather ones.
Yes.
Trish says I play Hogwarts Legacy board games, a hot shower. If I really need to take a hot shower, I can't decide what I'm going to do, and I'm like, I'm going to take myself a good long 30-minute shower. 5 minutes in, I've had something and I have to get out. I'm like, crap, I'm going to have a great shower, and I got to go.
Because that's when you always have the best ideas, in the shower or at 2 o'clock in the morning, and you're like,
or driving when you can't reach your phone. Yeah. Yep. Well, I mean, so here we go. This, you can bingo card this one. Brandon Sanderson, when he goes for drives when he's completely blank and needs to think through something, because he says the act of motion and driving is faster, and so it makes his brain move faster. So whatever unlocks in his brain is because he's driving faster. I think the same is true for a hike. Is you just being out there, even if you aren't thinking about your books, just being. And I always talk about my moments of normalcy, and now I have a word name for it, which is Ma, which is what Studio Ghibli films are known for having Ma moments, and it's the Japanese word for like a beautiful stillness. And you need to be experiencing Ma in whether which is, I think, is the opposite of flow, because flow would be when you enter flow and you're just flying, which can be relaxing or stressful, but you need to find places that you can experience Ma, where you can go out and look at the clouds. The best episode of Scrubs, episode 4, My Old Lady, she the little old lady who's in the hospital tells JD, when was the last time you just went out and laid in the grass in the park and stared at the sky? Because he hasn't stopped the whole episode. All he thinks, I have to do this. My life won't be fulfilled unless I do all these things. And she says, well, I've done all these things. Have you done any of them? Well, no. When was the last time you went out and just laid in the grass and stared at the sky and did nothing? Yep. And we need those. We need those moments so bad. It's giving me goosebumps right now.
Yeah.
So you've got to go out and experience Ma.
Touch grass.
You can. Touch some grass.
Right. Well, and also, to me, that's what creative rest is. For some of us, that looks like rereading a favorite book, or going on a walk, or going on a drive, or hanging out with friends and talking about something other than writing, and just, like anything that allows your creative brain to just kind of relax for a minute and kind of recharge. Because it's kind of like if we decided that, well, I'm just not going to sleep. That doesn't last very long. Obviously, it's like basic biology.
I love that idea, but no.
Yeah. Right, I do too. But in theory, I wouldn't love it very long. No. So yeah, Ari Morley.
Plus, I don't actually have the discipline to actually get things done during that time that I'm awake anyway. So what would it doubling that do?
Right. Yeah. I would just spend more time not procrastinating, essentially.
Yep.
Cleaning out stalls in the barn or going on a hike and not thinking about writing is the best for keeping the noggin going. To be honest,
absolutely.
One of the other things I had when I was in high school and writing books is I lived on a hobby farm. I took care of animals. I went on horse rides. I went on walks all the time. And I honestly think, part of it was the unbridled enthusiasm of I'm a teenager and I'm a new writer and I can't write books fast enough. But also I was constantly outside. I was constantly moving. I was constantly around. Animals are very relaxing. That's why we love our pets. It's why people I loved going out and just sitting on my horse's back while he was grazing in the pasture and just hanging out. And it's kind of my equivalent of laying in the grass and looking at the sky. Yeah. And that, I definitely miss that.
You need to write that in. You need to write that into book 2.
Oh, with Sindri and
with
Brig.
Sindri.
Yeah. There will be definitely more horsey
Give yourself a
things.
note. Yeah.
Trisha says, taking a break and reading a ton of books gets me going again real quick. Yeah. And reading old favorites, because I realized over December, I reread White Fang. I've reread one of the Red Rising books this last couple of months. And I rewatched my favorite K-drama, my favorite TV series of all time. And just the inspiration I feel after I finish those, because they've meant so much to me and they always get me excited about storytelling. Go back to those. Those are invaluable. Like, go back to your favorites, your favorite stories and characters, and let that be another, momentum to push your creativity forward. Yeah. Britain wants to know, what can't you do, Andrew?
I don't know. I haven't figured it out yet. I made bread this afternoon. Again.
I can't do that. I don't have the patience. I could if I taught myself, but I do not have the patience.
There's no patience at all. I'm an impatient man, Tori. I literally mixed it up. The only patience is forgetting about it. You go off and do your own thing for the next 8 hours. Then I don't need that dough. Mm-hmm. I mix it together and let it sit for 8 hours, and then I stick it in the oven, and it tastes wonderful.
My husband is the baker, so in fairness, it's more that I don't have to. Yeah. Nothing wrong with reread. Absolutely. And I actually think that that's a good thing to go back to.
Yeah. I think there's a re-centralizing that can happen from that too. Kind of a reset.
What do I love? Why do I do this? What do I love? Yeah.
Why is there that one movie that every time you watch it, you see something more to it? Yep. And you're like, and it's that one movie that you want to write a book based on, but you can never do because it's too good. Mm-hmm. And so, and you hope to someday, and you will. Someday
I will.
Someday my wife and I are going to co-write an Ocean's 11 book, and it's going to be perfect.
I'm so excited for
that. We're not there yet.
I will write the fantasy version of My Country, the New Age someday. It's going to happen. I mean, in a way, I already have, because we all put, bits and pieces of our favorite things in all of our stuff. But this is great. Trisha has a great question. So for us, what are some of the movies and books that we go back to?
Ocean's 11. That Thing You Do. Lord of the Rings. Mm-hmm. And so quintessentially, like, if I'm writing, I don't do musical playlists. It's sometimes I'll do like a fantasy lo-fi, or I'll just straight up do 2 hours of Rohan theme, because it's something that I don't have to think, but it's still there, and it puts a theme song in my head, and it's not an irritating song that's like, it's not Baby Shark, it's the Rohan theme. And so I can sit there and there's a couple good YouTubes where it's like just the flyover, not even Eteros, just the old place as it was, and it just does that for 2.5 hours. And if I ever can't write, I'll just stare at the flyover.
Lord of the Rings hypnotism.
Absolutely. Oh man. and it's not necessarily taking me into Lord of the Rings when I'm doing that too. Right. But Lord of the Rings does when I watch it. And so it's definitely just a part of my psyche in that case.
You're reawakening something that you fell in love with in storytelling, which is important when you're writing. I don't know. For me, films, I mean, The Outsiders, Young Guns. I just watched both of those again this week, and I still absolutely love them. Lord of the Rings for me too. The films for me. My Country, the New Age, which is my favorite K-drama of all time. I've seen it 5 times in 2 years, and I love it, and I want to watch it again. What else did I reread White Fang by Jack London in December. That's another one that always gets me really excited to make characters, tragic characters. I love tragic characters. That's a staple in every book I write. So my question for you, R.A. Morley, is, though you are the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker, but have you read Butcher, Baker, Candlestick Taker by Patricia Meredith? Because if you haven't, you should. Sorry, I saw that comment and I was all excited.
Historical fantasy.
Historical
fantasy. Historical mystery.
Wait.
Historical mystery. 1901 Spokane. Clockmaker comes to Spokane and is going to build the new clock, and his patroness is found butchered the next morning, and he is a prime suspect.
It's
And that's
really
just book
good.
1.
There are 3 of them currently.
So far.
Yep.
Of 13.
You guys are crazy.
Baker's dozen.
I was thinking about that though when I was putting this, thinking about doing Imposter Syndrome again, and I was like, between the 2 of us,
Yep.
do we have 20 books between the 2 of us? We're close. So I have 12, and you have
including your 12. And I have 5.5 with my novella.
So we're getting close to 20
Yep.
books between the 2 of us,
Yep.
and what, like 45 years of writing experience between both of us ish.
Sure.
40, 45, which is kind of wild when you think about it.
Yeah. And then you'll have at least 1, if not 2 more this year. And
1
I'll
for
have
sure.
probably 3 at least this year. Yeah.
Overachiever. I gotta write faster, you guys. I gotta catch up here. Let's see. Also fair. Ghibli films are amazing. But this goes back to reading and reading everything, watching everything. I read memoirs, I read literary fiction, classics, sci-fi, fantasy. I have read romance in the past. It's not for me, but I have read it.
There's so much of our past too that informs what we wish we would have seen in what we read.
Yep.
So that we write what we want.
Yep. I agree, Anitha. You got to clear some space on your TBR.
Well, because Anitha, I've already finished Collation 4. It's being edited.
See, the real reason Anitha hasn't read Bloodstones yet is because you're writing too fast, so she's trying to keep up with your stuff first.
She needs to read Bloodstones. Is what she needs to do.
I mean, I'm kind of afraid of Anitha reading Bloodstones. I'm not going to lie. I feel like I'm going to be getting some very strongly worded messages.
Guaranteed.
Yeah, I'm excited. I look forward to it. I feel like that's a rite of passage for an author at this point.
Yep. Anitha scolding you.
Yes. I was in one of my
hey, Alan.
Claims to fame was getting a all caps, like long all caps message from Kay's Hidden Shelf, which I was like, you guys know Kay.
You?
I did. Yeah. She was very strongly worded.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, man, I feel like accomplishment here.
Yeah.
Hi, Alan. How's it going? So any last thoughts that you want to impart for maybe for anybody who is watching the replay and might be kind of on the newer end of writing? Do you have any last advice pieces that you want to leave them or encouragement you want to leave them with?
Get a creative circle around you of other creatives. You need people who are at the same level. I said it earlier, but you need people who are at the same point in your career, so that you have alpha readers who you're reading and they're reading, and you're encouraging each other and falling with each other and picking each other up. So that you can have people who can give you permission to pivot, and also tell you when not to. Just say, you know what, you kind of need to gird your loins and finish the thing. You're literally 2 chapters from the end and you can't finish it. Okay, I get it. You're having a slump, but let's talk about this. Yep. And you need friends who will do that for you, who will encourage you and not discourage you, and also know you well enough to tell you the thing you always knew you should have told yourself, but you won't. Right. So that's what I would say is you really is do what you can to cultivate real friendships, the people that you respect.
Yep. Yeah. And obviously that would be my number one also, but beyond that, really embracing when you get to those moments where you feel like you need to have a pivot in whatever direction, whether it's in, your career or in the book you're writing, embracing that as an opportunity to grow as a writer, and just not being afraid of it. Be confident in the fact that you love to write and you're here to be a writer, and that pivoting does not mean failure, and it doesn't mean your life is over, or your book is over, or you can't do anything about it. Just look at it as, okay, this is a new beginning. Where do I go from here? Because I think that changes a lot of what you are also capable of in those pivot moments.
Yeah.
So, well, Andrew, thank you for sharing your evening on the channel once again.
Likewise.
And I hope you guys found this helpful and interesting. And I really appreciate chat also. Again, you guys are awesome. Thank you so much for all of your thoughts and your questions. For anybody watching the replay, thanks for joining us. Anybody who hasn't connected with Andrew yet, down in the description box below, there's a link to his Twitter and his website. So go check out his books, go check out his Twitter, say hi, go out and meet new people. A really easy tip that I gave another writer today is look at some of your favorite writers on Twitter or people that you respect in the community and dig into their who they follow list, because usually you'll find a lot more interesting people to follow through that. So that's a really easy way on Twitter, at least, to start working on your network. So thank you guys so much. Have a good night. I hope you all are reading 5-star reads, and we will see you in the next video. See you guys later.
Bye.